This will be an entirely spoiler-free video. Hello, I'm Dave, welcome back to the Book Corner. Now, the first time I talked to you about books of any sort, it was John Green's The Fault in Our Stars, which is now well and truly a film that is out, and another two of his books are now being made into films, and one of them, lovely stuff, is the first book in the big John Green box set that I got for Christmas and that I talked to you about then. It is, well, you know what it is, because you've already read the video title. It is Looking for Alaska. I like this book, and so in the interest of fairness, I tried to find some negative reviews on YouTube before I began this, so that I could take in alternative viewpoints about the book. Guess what? Couldn't find any. So here's what it's about. In the first half of the book, Miles goes away to boarding school and is on his own for the first time. The process of settling in there is a dramatic one, as is any teenager's attempts to make new friends, and he ends up fitting in with a cast of characters that are very carefully constructed. They're interesting people, but not for a moment in an unrealistic way. These are teenagers exploring their world and who've already made their surroundings their own. And here we follow Miles as he tries to integrate into that group as a newcomer. The Alaska, advertised on the cover, is the group's most intriguing member, something of a minor local legend, and a bit of a closed book. No, she's an open book, but it's open on a page that doesn't really say anything. But there's an interesting setup here. The book is divided in half, before and after. From the very beginning, the chapters are labelled with a timestamp, counting down the days. It doesn't tell us what we're counting down to, and so the inevitable quick eyes half closed check ahead confirms that once we get to whatever it is, we will start counting away from it. 3 days until, 3 days after. So we realise that whatever it's going to turn out to be, we are being eased into the passing of time that surrounds the most significant moment in Miles's young life. In the second half of the novel, the after section, where the search for Alaska really gets going, both among the characters and the reader, and Alaska herself starts to open out to them a bit and finally reveal some of the hidden details about herself. We discover that Miles's settling in phase is well and truly over, and what we're left with is a look at, among other things, the ways in which Miles, and by extension anyone, can be completely at home within a group of friends, share a genuine comradeship with them, and yet at the same time be separate and alone, by dint of the fact that almost nobody fits together perfectly, and no relationship worth mentioning can be summed up in simple terms. In other words, we are all individuals, we are all more complex than others imagine us to be, and we are all guilty of summing up the people around us and our relation to them in simple terms as well. By really looking for Alaska, Miles risks exposing as fiction the Alaska he thought he'd found. That's what it's about, but as with The Fault in Our Stars, the only other John Green book I've so far read, it's more about what is discussed and how than what happens. There's a moment where a teacher sets his students, including all our main characters, a philosophical term paper. The task is to come up with the most important question the human race must answer. It is impossible to read this moment without pausing to consider what your answer would be. The most important question that the human race has to answer. You just automatically feel like you should answer this too, and in the moment you forget something important about the real context of the question. It's asked by a character in a book. It's part of the structure of a novel, and that means it's something else entirely. John Green knows what I mean by this, and so do people who've read the book, but in the moment you just hear it as a question, and you start to think about it. I'd be interested to find out what answer other readers came up with in that moment.
I actually mean this. Not what your response to me saying it in this video was, but if you've read the book, I'd be interested to hear what your response was at the time. So tell me in the comments.
Mine came quickly, and I didn't think it through, but it was, yes, but should we? The way we imagine most novels work is to tell you about a story, make it as exciting or thoughtful as it can, and the words in the book tell you everything you need to know. But now and then there are books that work to make you feel like you're in the story. I'm interested to know how this is done, and Looking for Alaska has given me some big clues. This is a book that doesn't just tell you about its setting, it takes you there and it gives you a place to sit and a place to sleep, and it says, in the morning, check out what's happening over there. I think it has to do with the way memories form. I think there are times in our lives when our brains are more sponge-like, dragging in experiences and then holding them there in a slightly more heightened way. One of those times is your very early childhood. When you're experiencing the world for the first time and building your concept of reality, which takes years, you see mundane things as extraordinary because you've never seen them before, and they make a big impression on you. As an aside, I recently realised that I will never find out where I was the day I became mesmerised by different coloured light bulbs with little lantern-shaped covers over them, all dangling off loops of wire in some kind of outdoor eating situation at night. I can't ask my parents. There's no chance they'll remember the exact night I'm thinking of, because to them it's just a mundane, ordinary night. But because I was a baby, it made a huge impression on me. It's the first time I'd ever seen anything like that. Different coloured light bulbs at night, and that's because of this spongy effect. But I've got a theory that that doesn't just happen when you're a young child. I think it happens again when you're a teenager. As your brain starts to re-knit itself into an adult one, you take in all the usual images and learning, but instead of storing them as just cold, hard facts, they get tangled up with the feelings, and they end up inexorably mixed up with them. There are books whose purpose is to try and get these feelings facts onto paper, and if any of them got it 100% exactly right, they would have written a book that speaks to the reader deeply in a way that nobody would even be able to fully understand. That might not be possible, but there are books that make you feel like they're coming close, and Looking for Alaska is one of those books. I'm not quite sure what separates the two kinds of book. Thinking over the ones that have transported me, and you do tend to remember them, I think they tend to be the kind of books that present something close to something you've experienced, but more so. They root around in what it means to be going through a formative period in your life, and then they present that in a very intimate way. Well, the place that this book takes you to is that one that you've visited briefly a few times, the one where you suddenly find a new place, full of new people, and you start to fit in there. As another aside, it's probably worth mentioning that that same feeling is a huge part of what made the first Harry Potter book so engaging, and why the rest of the books felt so different. After creating that new home for her readers and letting them explore its corridors for the first time, Rowling necessarily couldn't provide that exact same feeling of fitting in with this new world ever again. In this case, the protagonist and narrator, Miles, leaves home for the first time to go to boarding school, where he'll be spending his high school years living in that wonderful, if illusory, state of independence that more often comes with the move to college. And the book captures this perfectly, including the smaller things, like the moment when you realise that you think of this new place as home. It feels like you've been there, and that's because in this book, the reader starts to work subconsciously with the author. On the one hand, the author has clearly been to these places and lived through some of these times, a theory which is borne out if you watch a couple of John Green's videos, such as one which gives you a sentimental walkthrough of the real-world versions of some of the set-piece locations from the book, a video which you can look at now if you click the cover of the book, but which is best viewed after you've read it and formed emotional ties to the places and visualised them yourself, because it's quite a rush to watch a man lead you in real life through places you thought you built in your head. And that's where your part of the work comes in. You have been to these places and you have lived these times, you have. The details were different and the places and people were different, but a lot of the feelings were the same. And as you read the book, you begin to thread your memories into the events of the story. In this book, that's quite an intimate process, because it doesn't shy away from describing some of the more serious, more practice adult experiences that teenagers go through for the first time. And this includes one very big, very important, very significant first time that we all inevitably go through at some point. No, not that, something else, but I'm not telling you what. And again, if that big moment has happened to you yet, you'll find yourself playing with the story in your head, swapping characters for real people you've known and comparing their experience with yours. Remember, or if it's still happening to you, consider this. You're a teenager, and there's this current going through you at all times that has to do with other people. Whatever your relationship to the people around you, it is a chief concern. People, teenagers, are suddenly the most important thing. There is a life that you can feel around you, at a slight remove, a sort of ethereal sense of what teenage friendships and relationships should be like. And you're near it, you can hear those people, but they're just on the other side of a low fence or round a corner. In just a few years, you'll look back and realise that what you were thinking of was your friends and your relationships, and that none of it was round a corner at all. But one of the frustrating things about the young people-obsessed imagination is that it can always conceive of deeper connections than it has. Well, this book is one of those places. It's an almost there world, just over that little fence. It's almost what you experienced. It's almost what you imagined as a teenager living away from home and with friends would be. And its narrator spends his time almost there as well, imagining more fully realised relationships than he has, not appreciating that the ones he has are someone else's almost. Or at least, that's what I thought and noted down for me to say in this video. But then I watched a video and read a longer interview in which John Green talks about the book and how much of any book comes out of the reader as opposed to the writer. And I started thinking about how much I brought to the table here. For all I said before about how the book reflects your own teenage memories back at you, my actual life and actual experiences don't mirror those of the book's characters. What I related to specifically was the sense of place and of excited displacement about leaving home and going to live at school, and what it feels like to stop living with your family and start living with your peers, which is something that I did. The potential for adventure, and how it feels when some of those adventures actually happen. But another reader might not have done any of that, or even thought about it. And someone else again might have very close ties to the story, including the bits where really terrible things happen to the characters. They would experience the story much more closely than I did, and depending on them and their distance from those events, that may be a great and healing thing, or it may be a harrowing thing. So I can't objectively say that you'll feel that transporting quality, but I can say this: if you're a teenager, you'll feel it more than I did. If you left school recently, you'll feel it more than I did. If you've ever stayed up all night with friends, or if you wanted to but didn't, you'll feel it. I'm actually quite annoyed that the characters in this book are gone now. The book moves you out of your home for the first time, and it puts you in this boarding school with these people. And you settle into these characters, and you spend days of their lives with them, and you come to care about them, and then poof, gone.